Schneider Electric is the proud sponsor of this podcast series. A core value for Schneider, for both its employees and customers, is to learn every day. They trust the following will provide some learning for you today.
My name is Jo Taranto and I'm joined today by Brendan Moore, Manager of Recycled Water Planning and Compliance at Yarra Valley Water.
Hi, thanks, Jo.
And with me is also Donald Hughan, Corporate Risk Coordinator at Goulburn Murray Water. Welcome, Donald.
Thanks, Jo.
And Llewellyn Prain, Deputy Chair of Greater Western Water. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks.
All of the people joining me today are also involved in other projects, which we're going to be talking about as we discuss diversity and inclusion in the water industry. Brendan, I'll start with you. You started Pride in Water about 4 years ago, is that right?
Yeah, about 4 years ago. Jackie Moon and I started it together and it's just grown from there.
Tell us what Pride in Water is all about and what you've been involved in.
Absolutely. So the main vision or purpose of Pride in Water has been to make our water industry a safe, inclusive and welcoming place for all members of the LGBTIQ plus community. And it's a concept that has been so widely embraced by our industry because, you know, I think it was a lot of representation lacking in that space beforehand. So it's been great to kind of form this community of people who are passionate leaders to change that for the better.
What have you noticed in that time? 4 years is not a long time, but also a lot can happen. Has there been a shift?
Absolutely. 4 years doesn't feel like a long time, but I think when you squeeze a pandemic in there, it definitely increases. It definitely plays with time, at least, because what we found was, I guess, the growth of Pride in Water just exponentially exploded because of COVID, because it enabled us to reach out and interact with parts of the industry that, you know, potentially might have been not as easy to meet with and discuss because we were still caught up in this, have to meet in physical locations or work can only be done when you're in the same room. So this shift to online working that our industry's had to undertake has actually been a great step forward, I think, for Pride in Water. Maybe too fast. I think it enabled us to contact too many people too soon. But, you know, in terms of getting that message out there and you know, that call to action, I'm blown away. So.
What about you, Llewellyn? You are the founder of WaterAble and currently the deputy chair of the organisation as well. How did WaterAble start?
Well, obviously we had the inspiration of Pride in Water as the trailblazer here in Victoria around how you might do something in the diversity inclusion space to really bring people together. I was probably a bit hesitant about being the one to kind of get the thing going. I have a vision impairment. I use a white cane. And I think I was a little bit hesitant about sort of being the face of WaterAble at the get-go. But I was really supported by some incredible women who helped sort of conceive of what WaterAble might be. It's a network for people with disability and their allies in the Victorian water industry. So we're very much Victorian-based and kind of leveraging off some of the diversity and inclusion work that's being done in Victoria and the women that were sort of working on that, predominantly women, some men. But I couldn't have done it without that kind of allyship of, yes, come on, Llewellyn, you've got to get this going. And so ours has got a very, WaterAble has it's an unincorporated association and it's a member-based structure with an organising committee. So that's kind of our structure with sort of democratic principles in place there. And what was unclear is because I'm a director on a board, and this is really an employee network, I wasn't really sure if I would, if there are employees out there with disability that really wanted to be part of it. And I'm incredibly grateful to the people that have come on board, and particularly Donald, who's here with us today, to really help make WaterAble what I kind of always dreamed and hoped it might be. It's really starting to fulfill its potential, which is fantastic.
I just really quickly want to just add to what Llewellyn said. Thank God for women, because I 100% concur. The only reason we have made any strides in this industry in any D&I space is generally because of amazing, strong female representation and leadership. And I think both of us have been touched really supportively by Jo Lim, specifically at Vic Water. Cannot sing her praises high enough.
Well, we're going to segue nicely into one of the wonderful men as well who's been involved in this project, and that is Donald. You are chair of WaterAble. What do you see that have been the biggest successes for WaterAble so far?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So really for me with WaterAble, the big success is we're predominantly Victorian based, but we're getting the word out there and educating water corporations in terms of disability and disability inclusion, allowing employees that may not identify as having a disability to have the courage to speak up and say, yes, I actually do have a disability, and then the water corporations can work with those individuals to come up with some reasonable adjustments just to make their life a little bit more easier, so they don't have to struggle the whole way through their working life, which is for me is a benefit for the individual, but also the water corporation, because they're both win-win for each other. The individual has a sense of belonging within the corporation, is satisfied that they're contributing to society, but also the corporation can see that they're supporting people with a disability and the amazing work that those individuals can do.
And I might add to that, Donald, because we launched July 2020, and so we were really aware that people in culture areas in water corporations were under quite a lot of strain just dealing with the pandemic at that point. And so sort of something new on top. We just wanted to go slowly. And we've been very much around awareness raising, and that kind of thing, which is really important at the start. And more recently, we've started trying to move to sort of more prompting of actions and industry workshops here in Victoria. But I think what's really exciting is the last results that were collected across the industry, all water corporations in Victoria, showed around a 2% jump of people identifying as having a disability, which is about 85 extra people identifying. And that was in 1 year in 2022. So that's really exciting to be able to, there's the vibe and there's people's daily experience in their water corporations, but there's nothing like some good statistics to make you feel like, you're moving things forward.
Certainly helps to have some numbers behind it, and that can really give some visibility or at least an indication of where the industries are. Brendan, did you feel the same about Pride in Water? Prior to that, how did it feel to be LGBTIQA+ and be represented in this industry?
Oh, absolutely. It was an issue in terms of that lack of representation. One of the driving factors for both Jackie and I was, that lack of representation. For me, it was the fields that I worked in, construction and operations, traditionally very blue collar, blokey bloke. I didn't feel safe physically and mentally to be able to handle having that aspect of my identity known, because I had no visibility of anybody else doing the same. And as Llewellyn said, it's daunting to have to think, is it me? Am I the first? Do I have to walk through this door? And for Jackie, and I'm not here to tell her story, but our industry can be a bit conservative, and so she had a rainbow family that didn't fit that kind of traditional mold of what it was to be a mother or a family member. And I think what it really highlighted to the both of us when we talked to each other was like, it's not just a professional thing. It's not just a personal thing. It is your identity as a whole. And that lack of representation, it takes its toll. And you don't want to stay in a place if there's no one that looks like you, if there's no one that, feels like they've had the same experience you.
Llewellyn, you must be hearing some stories from people throughout the industry, and you must get a sense that the water industry could do things a little differently at times. What do you think is important to foster true inclusivity for people who have a disability?
It's interesting because levels of employment of people with disability in Australia are way behind levels of employment of people who don't have a disability. So it's not something our whole society is doing wildly well at. And the barriers, the unconscious bias, we call it, I call it common or garden discrimination, is real. And the only way we really can overcome that is just to get more people into our organisations who have disabilities. It's to kind of reduce the stigma, reduce the awkwardness around it. It's interesting, one of the things I've discovered since developing a disability is suddenly people are awkward around me when they were never awkward around me before, because there's this, I'm not quite, this is something new and I'm not quite sure how to be around it. It's that real visible difference. And the only way to break that down, there's only so much training and awareness sessions you can do. It's the everyday working with people with disability and seeing how they can contribute and what they can do in your workplace. And I know there's lots of people in our industry who have friends and family members who have disability and are really committed to doing something in this space. And I just feel that it's organisations sort of enabling that to happen a little bit more, letting people managers, giving them more tools to make that happen. And that's one of the things WaterAble really wants to do, just some really simple guidance and things to do to help it happen. But at the end of the day, it's very much like all employment relationships, it often comes down to the team and the manager that can make it work. Systems and technology are also very important because but there's always workarounds. It comes down to people and people stepping up and wanting to be inclusive in their workplaces and make it work.
Donald, what advice would you have for people who have a disability and who are looking at the water industry or maybe have been in the water industry and are wondering what's next?
So, firstly, to start with, a person that isn't within the industry at the moment, but looking to gain employment and looking at the water industry as a potential candidate to try and get employment into. So, for me, I understand that it is quite confronting to put yourself out there, particularly when you have a disability. I'm totally wheelchair bound myself. So it is that, sense of if I apply for a position and if I'm lucky enough to gain an interview, once I go to the interview, if I haven't disclosed that I'm in a wheelchair prior, like in my application, am I going to be looked at differently in terms of, is that going to decrease my chances of gaining that employment? So I think it's hard for people to overcome that situation, but my advice to them would be to if you're comfortable, we straight up and disclose within your application that you do have a disability and may require some reasonable adjustments. Or even if you have that conversation when you're notified that you've got an interview and you've been shortlisted, then you can have that conversation then. But in terms of the water industry, I mean, for me, again, the water industry, particularly in Victoria, and across Australia, really, it's just got so many opportunities for people with a disability. Um, the things that you can do, whether it be you know working on a front desk at a customer service centre, becoming a supervisor or a manager, and all those types of things. And the industry offers flexible working arrangements as well, which also benefit those with a disability that may not be able to fulfill full time employment. But then again, having that employment, whether it be through a flexible working arrangement, um, the person that does have that employment is going to have satisfaction of contributing. So their output's going to be more meaningful. And it's just the case of, again, the water industry contributing to diversity and inclusion, which is a very important factor in today's society.
You're listening to the Australian Water Association podcast series, and I'm speaking with Brendan Moore, Donald Hughan, and Llewellyn Prain as we discuss diversity and inclusion in the water industry. I often wonder, Donald, if COVID has taught us to be more flexible or if it's just ingrained some of the things that we were doing more of before. But I wonder if one of the outcomes is that we have realised that just because we've always done something a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it's the best outcome. And I'm wondering if that's been your experience, is that post-COVID we're looking at new ways of working and suddenly that means that we are open to new things and that we have got a few new adjustments that we can make, and that suddenly those barriers have maybe shifted, maybe not come down. Is you got any experience of that, or is that just...
Yeah, absolutely. Like, the barriers have shifted in terms of the way we operate, because we've, been through a pandemic or still sort of in a pandemic in some ways, but we're recognising that you don't have to go to an office 9 to 5 each day. You can do things over Zoom, MS Teams, all those types of things, emails. So we've still got that connectivity between individuals and their workplaces, and the output's still there. So you're still being able to contribute. You're just not having to have the burden of attending an office each day, 9 to 5, or whatever the case may be. So it does benefit those in particular with flexible working arrangements, and allowing those arrangements to be put in place more easily.
Brendan, you must have been starting to accrue a little bit of advice for industry to say, you know what, these are the things that Pride in Water advocate for and think that you can do to be better allies and be more inclusive. Are you starting to get a real sense of what that looks like for utilities or organisations in the industry?
Yeah, and I think, that advice that we've learnt or what we've figured out during this time, it doesn't even feel like it's just specific to the LGBTIQ plus community. Honestly, it's just common sense, and I feel like what we were talking about before with those reasonable adjustments. I think that previously small reasonable adjustments were still viewed as just too hard, by our industry, and it didn't matter what it was or who it was for, and the onus was on the individual to have to, provide a context or a structure or a solution for the business to have to roll out, rather than the business or the broader industry having any sense of responsibility. And so, what we found through this work is I'm not asking for much personally. I don't think my community is asking for much. I don't think anybody who doesn't fit that cis, white, straight, able-bodied male mold is asking for much by saying, hey, this is an industry I want to work in. Hey, I want to feel safe. And hey, I don't want to be treated like a token employee. And so what I think, the best outcome for us in this space has been a global pandemic. It kind of forced the industry to get the kick up the arse it needed to have to mainstream reasonable adjustments. When it came to any of our communities, it was too hard, it was too much work. But when your whole workforce requires reasonable adjustments to keep going, they start to realise, oh, well, this kind of makes sense. And so it's really resulted in some of these very traditional expectations being broken down. And it's the first barrier to get over. So now we can actually start talking about, all right, here's the issues that our communities are facing, regardless of what community that is. So that's been the biggest kind of win for us, and the biggest advice that I could give to the industry as a whole. Don't try to go back to pre-pandemic. Pride-demic? There's a pride-demic going on. That's my life, Joe, is a pride-demic.
It sounds like World Pride.
Yeah.
That's all right.
But don't try and go back to how things were before the pandemic, because some people think that was great, but the vast majority of us thought it was not so great.
Mm. And Llewellyn, same sort of question for you. What are the top actions and recommendation that you think WaterAble are best able to advocate for from the industry to help include people with disabilities and promote greater inclusivity, respect, and just acceptance?
I'd just like to add to what Brendan said that, we're an essential service. So, our customers are the community, and if we don't understand how to accommodate our employees or have employees who are reflective of the broader community, we're not going to do as well serving our customers. So I think it's sort of critical for water to get on board as an industry in that sense. And it's great to see that they're starting to. But I sort of answered this question before. I'm all about employing more people, but I think it's also employing people at all different levels. You can have entry programs, and that's great to get people into your organisation, and you can have internships and things like that. But we don't see many people with disability on exec teams, and we don't see many people with disability on our boards. Excuse me. So it's trying to think about that, building up disability expertise in water and having people in all different kinds of roles across organisations. And to do that takes a little bit more effort and a little bit more thought, but that's where you're going to get the results. People are endlessly surprised to hear that a blind woman is the deputy chair of Greater Western Water, but I want that to be a sort of not as surprising.
What about the fact that so many disabilities are not at first obvious to people? And I guess your experience is that probably for a lot of people that they may not know immediately that you have, a disability at all, which is great. But also there's a lot of people in the world whose adjustments are not immediately obvious because it's maybe not a physical adjustment that's required. Are you getting a sense, and are people showing up to advocate for that experience as well, whether, there's a neurodiversity there or other needs?
Absolutely. Invisible disabilities are all around us all the time, but they're really easy to ignore, and some of them have some of the sort of biggest stigmas. So that's where that sort of awareness and empowerment piece is really important. It's really hard to disclose you've got a disability because I think, as I mentioned earlier, generally everything in our culture around disability is kind of either negative, low expectations, or sort of infantilizing, like, oh, you're doing something, you left the house, you're wonderful. And so I think anyone with a disability has to go through a bit of a process to really either embrace it or live with it how they want to. And so not everyone wants to come out and be disability proud, and not everybody wants to do that. For me, it's been some of the most fulfilling stuff that I've ever done, to be able to come out and try and make change for people with disability. But I really recognise people in other spaces, and if you have an invisible disability, I think it's harder. It's harder to do, and can be a slightly different process. So that's where that inclusion piece comes, because if people feel confident to speak, then it just becomes part of the fabric of our organisations, because more people feel comfortable to be open about it, which is what Donald was talking about earlier as well. But that's a journey for each individual and each organisation.
So, Donald...
Can I just jump in for a sec?
Yes.
So, just on the back of what Llewellyn has said, in terms of invisible disabilities, a person that has the courage to actually identify with an invisible disability, you got to acknowledge the fact that there's a little bit of a fine line between caring and over caring for that particular person, because the reason, or one of the reasons why they potentially won't disclose, is because the fear of being looked at differently, and the stigma around what that looks like. So we sort of got to acknowledge the fact as well that if they do disclose, we've still got to give them their independence, and let them live their journey the way they want to go. So yeah, just to recognise that as well. That's what we're trying to encourage water corporations in particular to recognise and acknowledge and see that as a real issue.
So, Donald, is the water industry doing enough then to be inclusive, and what should be done to address the lack of perhaps disability representation?
I think like the industry is moving in the right direction in terms of inclusion for people with a disability. Of course, there's some things that we can always improve on, which is in terms of our access to our offices and all those types of things, if that's warranted. But I think the shift for flexible working arrangements that have come into place and things like that has improved and is contributing to the importance of diversity and inclusion, and the increase in terms of the acceptance from water corporations to allow for people with a disability into their organisations. And I think just in terms of just in terms of seeing the benefit of the individual and the way that they are are embracing their contribution. I think from a water corporation's point of view, yeah, that's nice to see, but it also shows that they are including uh, diversity and inclusion, or disability inclusion, into their workforce.
You're listening to the Australian Water Association podcast series, and I'm speaking with Brendan Moore, Donald Hughan, and Llewellyn Prain as we discuss diversity and inclusion in the water industry. Would you all agree that while Pride in Water and WaterAble represent very different communities, that there are some shared similarities and things that you can either work on together or learn from each other? I'll start with you, Brendan.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I think the D&I space is made up of groups or focus areas that are trying to better include and make feel valued different communities. And, you know, a lot of those foundational pieces that are required to make that happen are pretty ubiquitous. And it's not just tied to LGBTIQ plus or disability inclusion or Indigenous inclusion or female representation in certain areas. Like, it's the biggest hurdle to overcome, I think, is getting that traction and getting that platform. And, you know, the emotional and personal workload that people in this space have to take on, it's a very much a shared experience that we have. And so working really closely between Pride and Water and WaterAble, and like, I have nothing but the utmost respect for Llewellyn and Donald, and I'm just blown away with what they've done. But this is the community of people I want to be around. I want to be around the people that are, you know, same but different. Do you know what I mean?
In talking about differences then, Llewellyn and Donald, why is it so important to have WaterAble then? If you go, oh, you know, it's just another diversity inclusion thing. What does it mean to have a community, and how is your organisation different from other organisations that represent diversity?
Can I just respond to what Brendan said? Because with Pride in Water being the trailblazer that it is, you know, I don't think WaterAble would have happened without Pride in Water and the amazing work that he and Jackie Moon got done. And he's just been so generous to WaterAble. He came to our planning meeting earlier this year because we're sort of contemplating. We've got interest from people outside Victoria about what we're doing, and just being able to have the conversation about what this work is all about and what it means, and that it's, at the end of the day, it's not, you know, we're compartmentalised as in Pride in Water and WaterAble, but a lot of people are, you know, there's that awful word intersectionality, but we're all just people. But I think when you have groups that are really focused on making change in particular areas of diversity, that can be helpful, because there are some specific differences, thematically very similar and similar issues, but there's some particular issues around disability, which is why it so often gets left off, because or sort of people don't quite get to it in the diversity and inclusion sort of journey in organisations, because every person who has a disability will experience that disability differently. So the reasonable adjustments are not necessarily uniform, and that's something organisations just want. Well, just give me the policy and I can do it for all the blind people. And it doesn't quite work that way. It's much more about teams and managers, and, you know, some inclusive design in the way you do systems and processes. So there's that sort of difference. But, by the same token, people want the checklist on how do I make my organisation, LGBTQI kind of inclusive? Give me that checklist. So, but I think at the end of the day, there's enough differences that you need to draw out and help people work through to make the change for the benefit of all sections.
I might finish with a question to each of you about what you'd like to see happen next. What would you like to see your organisations be able to do, maybe together or separately? And where would you like to see the water industry head or continue to head? Donald, do you want to start?
Yeah, okay. So I'd like to see, WaterAble embraced within all water corporations, particularly in the Victoria in the first instance, but knowing that we have had contact from outside Victoria as well, interested in what WaterAble are doing. So that shows to me that the us as an organisation or a network, you know, is being recognised. And I think if we can contribute to the encouragement of disability inclusion across the water industry as a whole, for me, that's what we're here for. That's what we want to do. So that's what I think.
And for you, Llewellyn?
Yeah, I kind of I agree, and I think for me, the numbers don't lie. So Victoria's got a target of 10% people identifying as having a disability across all water corporations. If Victoria could hit that target, I think that would be great in terms of showing the rest of the country what's possible. And, with WaterAble sort of helping the industry do that, but also really empowering people with disability in our industry to pursue the careers that they want to in our industry and have an industry that supports them to do that, and help them be advocates and all of those fantastic things. That's how you get the sort of hit a target like 10%. And if that helps us grow nationally and help other organisations do better in this space, that would be great. But, I always love a target.
It helps, doesn't it? And you, Brendan, where would you like to see things be heading?
I think my first wish, I'm going to have three. I'm going to treat you like a genie, Joe. But my first wish would be that this space, the D&I space, was properly resourced across our industry. I think there are some very passionate people who work specifically in the D&I space, but what is really common, and I don't think I've ever met a D&I practitioner that hasn't had this experience, is that they're often the sole person running D&I in their whole business, and they have conflicting priorities. And anyone that works in that D&I space has probably heard the concept of disadvantage Olympics, or who do we cater to first. And as Llewellyn was saying, certain aspects of D&I which are harder or don't have legislated targets are often like, oh yeah, we'll get to it. So first wish is, just support the people who are trying to do this work in your industries. The second wish is that support your employees who step up to do this work. Often D&I work is disruptive and transformational. It's societal, cultural change. And when work is disruptive, surprisingly, it disrupts some people, Joe, and people don't like being disrupted. And so the pushback is often like an emotional load, just the having to put everything on your shoulders. I often joke about the fact that I have a day job that I would do 40 plus hours in, but I've got a full-time gay job as well, which is Pride and Water and all that work. And I think the value around that work, especially for an individual, is something that the industry needs to improve on. And my third and final wish, Joe, is I would really like our leaders to be leaders. I think they are all too often waiting to be led to the answer in this space. Tell me what I need to do. Tell me how I can help. What do we need to do to be able to do this? And there's a difference between, deciding for a community what they need and excluding them from the conversation. But the alternative, the other end of the spectrum of just saying, well, you fix it and your responsibility, it's not good leadership. And I think if you're a good leader, you don't look at D&I work as this soft and fluffy thing that we do because it softens the edges of our business. If you're a good leader, you're smart enough to know that D&I is a crucial business fundamental thing you should be doing, because you don't want an industry full of the same person churning through the same straight, white, able-bodied, cis male. I'm so sorry. That's the second time I have attacked that community in this podcast. But diversity represents diversity of thought and diversity of outcomes. And so if they really valued this work, they would fund the D&I spaces in their industry. They would support the people who put their necks on the line. Someone asked me the other day, am I better for doing this work with Pride and Water? And I'm better because of the pride that I carry for how it's affected our industry. Am I better career-wise? I'm not sure, because I've had to put so much of my personal energy and time into giving to the industry that I haven't given to myself and my own career. And so it's actually set me backwards in that regard, I think. And I think the other expectations, this is a very long-winded question. But I mean, the generation after us, they're not waiting for anything. I mean, Gen Z and below, they have this ingrained social expectation that everyone is equal and everyone should be able to do what they want to do in their careers and live the life that they want to live. And they won't stand for companies that are all talk and no walk. So again, that goes back to the whole, it's not just the right thing to do, but if you're a decent leader, you need to do it.
I've been speaking with Brendan Moore, Manager, Recycled Water Planning and Compliance at Yarra Valley Water and co-founder of Pride in Water, as well as Donald Hughan, Corporate Risk Coordinator at Goulburn Murray Water and Chair of WaterAble, and Llewellyn Prain, Deputy Chair of Greater Western Water and Founder and Deputy Chair of WaterAble. It's been my absolute pleasure to have all three of you with me today, and thank you for all of the things you've shared and all of your insights.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
Thank you.